The victims of contaminated blood products and transfusions in the late 70s and early 90s who contracted hepatitis C had a long and tough road to get justice from the state.
I inherited all this problem. I've done my best to sort it out.
When they finally got it, they were given statutory entitlements to medical and other supports. Now the HSE is in dispute about continuing the funding for two of the sufferers' support groups, Positive Action and Transfusion Positive. The HSE will only fund fixed costs with no discretionary spending this year.
I think the HSE has to take a tough line. It's taxpayers' money, and I think the taxpayer would expect the HSE to know exactly how every single euro is being spent.
The HSE wants the two groups to enter into a new finance agreement with increased oversight. This comes as the HSE has begun scrutinising receipts, some of which were released to primetime under the Freedom of Information Acts. They show that large sums were spent on weekends away from members and their families and on international conferences. A weekend away in 2010 for 34 members of Transfusion Positive and their families cost over €41,000. Over €11,000 was spent on complementary therapies, including reflexology and counselling. Almost €4,000 was spent on gifts, golf, workshops and children's activities. Another weekend to Connemara cost over €46,000, with complementary therapies costing over €13,000. Gifts, golf, workshops and children's activities cost over €2,000. When Positive Action brought their members and families away for a cost of €21,000, almost €8,000 was spent on complementary therapies, and a band cost €1,000. Despite contributions from members, weekends, meetings and workshops of both groups cost the state in 2010 $314,000, one-third of their funds that year. Having approved funds for these weekends over 18 years, the HSE and others are now asking questions.
I think an awful lot of things developed over the last number of years, but in these more difficult financial times, we have to have accountability and we have to look at how we spend every single euro. As a GP myself, one of my greatest concerns is that I find it very difficult getting specialist services for my patients. So if I think that state-supported organisations are spending money on complementary services, I would still like to see what these services are and what is the breakdown of these services that are being provided.
It's not free weekends away, and it's not we're off every weekend and having a great life. It's about really helping each other, supporting one another, and the same with the therapies. A lot of women are suffering with rheumatoid arthritis, and it's a part of hepatitis C.
Transfusion Positive say that the weekends contribute to members and their families' physical and psychological health. While members are entitled to use complementary therapies, the HSE points to the lack of transparency in the receipts. The invoices do not indicate who provides the therapies and if they are by qualified professionals, as is claimed by the groups. The other cost area of dispute is money spent on international conferences. For example, both groups sent members to the Liver Meeting, a Boston conference aimed at hepatologists and hepatology professionals at a cost of €35,000.
Well, the whole thing about Positive Action going to these conferences is to find information for women and bring it back in language that we can understand, and tell us what they've gotten out. And the reason maybe 4 may go would be, one will be writing stuff, they'll be doing up a report themselves on what they've been doing. So all these people are working on a voluntary basis. Their expenses, of course, will be paid, which is natural, I would have thought.
Many of these conferences, the information that's been provided, you could probably get over the internet. And we're already doubling up on this because we may well be sending clinical specialists to these conferences at exactly the same time.
The HSE declined to be interviewed, as did both support groups. They say that they are currently in negotiations about this year's funding. Positive Action says it has at all times met appropriate governance and accountability standards required under its finance agreement with the HSE. Likewise, Transfusion Positive says it has always submitted certified audited accounts to the HSE, keeping in mind transparency, governance and probity at all times. Given the historical injustice done to the very sick and vulnerable people who rely on these support groups, they say that it's important that the dispute ends soon and that their full funding be resumed.